future generations to meet their own needs. We look at and for me, it just goes back to like planning. We need to ask questions and say, okay, what's the plan for the city? Where is it going? It's exploding in all directions. Where is it going? What is the plan? And if there is a plan, where is it? Can we see it? So that if I decide I want to buy land to construct my house, to construct commercial spaces, I can choose and say, okay, the city is set to expand in this direction in the next 10 years. This is what I want. If we can't change the models as they are, and then you choose land depending on what the plan is. But I feel we need to start asking the question that what is the plan in most of the construction spaces in the global south? It's like, what is the plan? Where are we going? And how do we then move and make sure that however we use the resources that we have is sustainable? And talking about that arable land, there are a lot of young Zimbabweans now that are considering farming as a profession, really. And I'm thinking, are we not then, given the potential of lock-in with construction, are we not then sort of wasting arable land? And given that with the effects of climate change that are around the corner, we'll need food. These are things that we need to consider to say, okay, if these are the places that actually receive rainfall in the country, can we not then house people elsewhere and keep this resource and make sure that we continue to farm on it and support the economy and support even retain our status as the breadbasket of Africa, But if we then use all that and say we're constructing, we're developing, then what happens for the generations that are to come? And I think that's something that we have to pay attention to. So yeah, what really is the plan? That's my question.
What really is the plan? And what you said about looking at managing land as a resource, that's utmost important, because when you think about sustainability, you can only build on one location. But somewhere else in the world, the idea of construction is very different to how we usually think of, kind of digging and tilling the ground and then putting your bricks on bricks. And Fan Yulin will kind of elaborate on that with Fluxus. As everything is assembled in a factory, everything is assembled almost like you're putting a house together, like you're building Legos. So tell us a little bit more about this, and how does that tie into sustainability?
Thank you. It's so exciting, the whole conversation. I just want to following on the previous speakers. The solution for sustainable construction is really largely defined by local environmental, economic, social, political, and cultural context, like everybody mentioned. And when it comes to housing, a house becomes a true home when it really nurtures our soul and providing the safety psychologically. So when we put the human beings' well-being and of course our shared home nature at the center, the solution can serve its purpose. And for example, construct from locally available materials, but using a globally systematic way can be possible. In the African continent, the treasure is actually the young populations and the talents, the spirit, the entrepreneurial culture, the potential. It all present such a uniquely powerful opportunity for innovation and construction in this field. And respecting the old way of building, not old way of building, but traditional way of building their own home, like Leo explained. That's our opportunity. We just have to help them shorten the timeline, which is the digital technology and prefabrication come into being. We can provide them the tool instead of like a top-down construction company and government impose some planning, but it can be very organic, respecting the people's way of building, people's way of living, and empower them with the new tools that's available in other parts of the world. So back to your question about prefabrication in terms of sustainability, I think everybody here, the panelists and audience, understand that sustainability goes beyond the environmental aspect. But for the, like you mentioned, manufacturing components in a factory has been shown to cut emissions by 60% compared to conventional way of building on site. And one significant factor is the sharp deduction of traffic movement by 40%. So that's huge. And also overall, the energy efficiency, housing solutions like increasing insulation, so you don't have to rely too much on the air conditioning in this kind of active way, can substantially reduce the cost of ownership. So we're not only talking about the cost of construction upfront, but cost of ownership for residents, for dwellers, communities, to really see the how they can sustainably financing their home when you operate it. And this will in turn narrow the affordability gap. And when we also incorporate the locally available and recyclable materials into a minimum number of components, like our system, the design principle is to have multifunctional components, but reduce the number of components in a streamlined process in home manufacturing. So this can further enhance energy and resource efficiency.
Those are amazing stats, Fanny. I mean, 60% deducted of carbon emissions, and then 40% also of the fact that transport is, is not as frequent when it comes to constructing from a factory. Now, one of the things, or one of the, ideas around sustainable construction and new material, as you said, looking at new tools, is the idea of using timber as one of the construction materials. And this is a question for Veronica, which, by the way, congratulations. She was recently appointed board chair for the Forestry Commission of Zimbabwe, making her the youngest person and woman to be appointed. So congratulations to you, Veronica. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So my question to you is, what do you think about using timber as a construction material, and what exactly do you aim to do to do in your space and in your new appointment?
Wow, what a challenge. I think using timber in the long run has to be sustained by planting and sustainable treatment of timber. And the challenge that we're currently having is the short treatment that is happening in the quality of timber, where we have seen even some houses coming down because probably there was still moisture in the timber, and over time it gets weaker and the roofs fall. So I think there's an aspect of standardization that is very important to monitor in the timber industry. And then the other aspect also relates to the actual processing and treatment around timber, and then even the affordability part. So it means we really need to work with our timber plantations so that we are able to plant heavily and be able to bring in technology that can then produce the necessary timber at a more affordable rate so that people can afford it. And also it will be good quality for any household. And what we have also done probably as Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe, it's around offering a facility under the infrastructure value chain facility to support the whole value chain in the construction and infrastructure industry. So it's basically to then ensure that there's the needed capital to support the upcoming entrepreneurs and those that are already in the industry so that they can be able to have resources to expand production. So I think it's another very important component. When it comes to affordable housing, you also realize that 30% of the household income that is spent on either rentals or housing makes a household to be cost burdened. But for Zimbabwe, most of the people are actually spending even 50%, which then makes them more severely burdened. So the need for affordable housing has become more critical in such a time like this. And I think there is even need to even explore the roles of DFIs in terms of what they can play to ensure that we provide affordable housing to the people. There was an issue around land that was discussed. Where do we go and get, land that is authentically given out and serviced and it's above board? We saw the houses in Shutungwiza as well recently. They were sinking in water. Others attributed it to poor drainage. But I think those are the standards that the DFI should also be coming in to make sure that we provide affordable housing to people that is sustainable, that is resilient. And of course, from a forestry commission perspective, the issue of standardization of the quality of timber is also something that we want probably to look at as a community and ensure that people don't buy substandard materials, which becomes more costly at the end of the day over a long period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. So when we look at, you spoke about financing sustainable housing. How exactly does that work? How accessible is that to the average citizen in Zimbabwe? And how do they go about, trying to gain access from that? Because I think from one of the things that Leonard touched on was that nowadays, especially from the African context, we don't usually build from hiring construction companies. We'll build by ourselves. So when we think about, the financing of trying to build more sustainably, how do we tap into those finances?
The current financing that is available has been around the value chain. It hasn't been more on an individual perspective, but from an individual perspective, we've got what we call home saver, where we encourage individuals to save for their housing so that they can then build over time. But in terms of the infrastructure value chain facility, it's really to support the whole construction value chain from your timber industry in terms of providing capital to scale up production and to buy equipment for processing, so that at the end of the day, the timber that goes to that basic household that requires affordable housing, they are able to afford it, they're able to buy it at a lower cost. And also, if you look at even our tarred rods, what is required, most of the materials are local. So what type of capital is required to ensure that we then increase production at scale, more sustainable and more affordable, so that at the end of the day, that gravel that is required or that pit sand that is required is actually sourced at a more affordable rate. So the infrastructure value chain basically seeks to support the industries that operate in the infrastructure sector and ensure that they improve efficiency in their production systems and also scale up in terms of capacities.
Thank you, Veronica. As we continue the panel, just to our guests and those that are watching, please continue to engage with us using the questions. Our second poll question is up, which is, what does sustainable construction mean to you? We've received some of your answers of where you live, and it seems the majority of you are living in standalone houses, an apartment, bachelor pad, and more standalone houses, which is quite interesting when you look at the dynamics of this conversation. So the next question would be to each of you that are watching, on a scale of 1 to 10, how sustainable are you? You can have some time to think about it and drop your answer in the comment section. Carrying on with the conversation, one of the key topics is looking at how do we transition from looking at older methods of sustainability to us looking at the current method of sustainability. When we look at the materials that we use, the resources that we use, how do we start to transition the way we build to a more sustainable model? And this is open to all the panelists.
I think Jacarasi had a few really good points for that. It's capacity building for local production units. How can government and banks support them to produce more local sustainable material? And how can we make that efficient by banks or government supporting them to buy new equipment? When you have upgraded new equipment, you also are using less energy to process a certain material. It depends on the industry, but more so often updated technology uses less energy. It's not very energy draining in terms of the construction industry. and also looking at timber as a resource. She also mentioned that growing it and processing and also treatment, all of these stages needs to be considered. That's a great point. If the case is that's the most sustainable material for Zimbabwe, I would say mapping first, like Patience mentioned, on what resources they are present, which is how many construction industries exist, what are the most popular local materials that are available that are the most sustainable. As a government, ranking them by carbon footprint and percentage of availability, because if all the houses are built today using only timber, then you are draining a huge natural resource. So we need a distributed system and say like, okay, these people are closer to this area, so this region will be with wood, this region will be with clay, this region will be with unburnt clay. So kind of mapping that, and then also allocating those construction industries to those regions and giving maybe tender benefits to those construction industries there so they don't compete with the others, and youth, training youth in high skills in these industries so there are more jobs created and money doesn't leave Zimbabwe. That's the most important part. The aim for the construction industry is to retain the finance within the country, and that is simply by choosing local and mainly choosing smart within the local context. This is one of the things I can think.
I love that, choosing local and choosing to do it the smart way. I think it's quite amazing, the fact that, you know, when you think about sustainability, from what you said, we have to not only think about ourselves as individuals, but what are the policies so that we can allow for us not to, you know, overuse certain resources. And that would lead to a different type of problem, which we don't obviously want to deal with. And what about when it comes to technology? How can we start to incorporate technology in our sustainability?
Yeah, I can answer that, trying to answer that. I think technology is not at the center of the solution. We see everything has to contextualize in the local context and put the goal at the center, and then technology is there. And I think for the purpose of this discussion, many building technology and sustainable construction space is tested and rolled out in other parts of the world that can be transferred in the local context. But the key is really to collaborate to see how why that technology works in the context. For example, in the US, it's largely driven by policy, and in other countries in Asia, it's also driven by policies. So there's bigger context. And when we like introduce technology to African cities, a shift from a pure technology transfer has to be shift to learning from the best practices and harnessing technology from within, like really respecting how the local is operates and the local resources, and working with different agencies, like all the panelists mentioned, how important is the cross-industry effort. And then we can achieve that by a combination of like center of excellence, education program, incubator, accelerator, this kind of laboratory Leo was talking about, and really put together actionable plan with piloting project. Maybe we thought about establishing the manufacturing and production center locally and engage local populations in the construction process, creating jobs. So it's all linking different parts of local economy and contribute to the sustainable growth of the region, and build their capacity to even export in the neighboring regions. That will be the goal is to achieve the sustainability of an ecosystem that we are building. And also, I think the collaboration could be potentially provide a very critical path to answer how African cities apply some strategy that's a scalable solution from other places to further develop them into different economic and business models. through an organic process of their own evolution from within. Yeah, the ultimate goal is really to enable a ecosystem that's self-sufficient in finance, technology, innovation, manufacturing, marketing, and distribution themselves. And it will be a collective of local level operations to address like specific urban and social issues. So I think the success will be centered around empowerment of people, dwellers, and wealth building for the community, and collaboration through network globally and locally, and sustainable growth from self-efficient to export capacity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Fanny. I think, what you said about, we start to think about sustainability as an ecosystem rather than just isolations of ideas. And then we start to think about it more self-sufficiently. Just as we talk about that, I'm reminded around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And when we look at how is that going to impact the way construction will be going forward, as you know, a lot of African countries do prefer to import materials from different countries, from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Malawi, from Kenya, from Rwanda. And how exactly is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement going to affect the way housing will be looked at, especially from a sustainable point of view? Maybe Leo, you'd like to tap into that?
Before I just dive into it, I think what Fanny was saying, I think is very important in terms of collaboration that comes to the local context. I think the technology always works, especially if we're talking about AI, robotics. We're programming something to replicate what we already have. So the technology always works, but we have to code for the program. And for me, what I mean by coding for the program is saying, if we have models of houses locally in Africa, we code them, and the prefab guys, they make the specific type of contextual homes that are livable within the African context. And I think that's how we can transition, like what you said earlier, like how do we transition from the traditional to the technological? Because in the past, the code of the African, sustainable living or product hasn't been encoded in that existing technology. So it's more of like copy paste. We're going to 3D print a home in the United States, in a low density suburb here in Africa, and it's not going to work because it's a code within. Fanny said it correctly. Like a house has to talk about the psychological aspect of a person. How do you exist in the housing? How do you so? We at this stage, and this is why the labs then present, these wonderful opportunities that we want to tap into the technology, but then we understand the code. Because, I said earlier, the technology always works because it just needs an input into the code. So we design specifically for the African context. And this is what we're doing. And this from the previous experiment that we're currently running right now. It's easier to then, put in the code to the existing, technology out there. And I think that's quite exciting, especially when it's bound by collaboration. It's no longer copy paste. It's who's on the ground and who can we identify to use those existing infrastructures to allow, which comes back again to when I was schooled by Samira about human-centered design. And I think this has been a key angle to how do you focus on the people and then use the tools you have to advance what they want. And coming to your question, I think the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement poses an incredible opportunity. Back in the day, Zimbabwe used to be the largest exporter of timber. It used to be the biggest, and I'm going to say this in front of the board chairwoman so that she takes it up as a mandate that we increase capacity. Because at the end of the day, what we have now is an opportunity to export more products freely and more flexible. Because we want, under the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, the biggest winners are the people who will be producing for their external, not just producing for themselves. Because the tariffs are low, everything is more flexible and moving. It's going to be the ones exporting, not importing, that are going to gain. So at the end of the day, if we are making infrastructure inputs, we have to thrive on, if we're going to have Fluxus set a factory here in Zimbabwe, we're going to have them distribute from Zimbabwe across other African continents because, Zimbabwe is strategically located as a landlocked country to other countries. So the biggest winners for us is people like us who are strategically positioned to manufacture the infrastructure inputs. And what I mean by infrastructure inputs, I mean, the things that we're going to be using, brick and mortar, whatever it is, the material that we're going to be producing, is that experimenting locally as countries to see what do we have as a material that we can transport outside. So I think because of the stats that I gave earlier, Zimbabwe is standing at 1.2 million and South Africa is standing at 2.6 million housing backlog. All those people need materials. At one point before, asbestos was banned as a building material because it was unsustainable due to the cancer that it caused for the asbestos miners. So to those who don't know, asbestos is like the roofing material that was used back in the day. And currently still being used in Zimbabwe as a low-cost housing building material for these low-cost houses. So at that point, because we're a large export market, you realize that, for foreign direct investment, it really it comes in volumes because you have inputs for these houses. Because all over the world, in terms of housing, whatever we're going to be experimenting on is strategically positioning ourselves. What are we producing for export in order for us to benefit from the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement? So the biggest highlights for me would be identifying the infrastructure inputs. For us, timber has always been one of our biggest export, and we need to take back that title because it's a very sustainable material. And even if we're going to be tapping into bamboo and all these other materials, in order for us to gain from the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. So the biggest takeaway would be countries should focus more on these infrastructure inputs so that they can export under the Free Trade Agreement.
Absolutely. And I think that ties in very well with collaboration when we look at the African continent. Just before we continue the conversation, unfortunately, Samira will have to leave us quite briefly. So if you just have a few words to say before we continue the conversation. I see, Patience, you also have something to add on to that. Let's just have Samira sum up.
I think you have it covered. And also looking at human expertise, I think is important. Trade is often looked at as, physical materials, but how can Zimbabwe train the next generation, the youth, and they have potential in unlocking a lot of resource and being the experts and leaders in how to solve informal settlement problem, how to self-build, how to do it efficiently and sustainably, and also set a roadmap for the first prototype to be done, and then that to be shared as a system with others can also be something that can be looked at. But I would say without having all the stakeholders on the ground, just like in this panel, it is hard to accomplish it. Technology can get us to an extent, then the bank can get us, and the government, then the people. So, but everybody needs to be there. So it needs to be the whole group effort, I would say.
Thank you, Samira. A comment from one of our viewers who says, thank you for your time. They love what you said about policy change, and that's a major part of building.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Patience, sorry about that, but we'd like to continue what you wanted to say.
I think it just ties on to what Samira was saying actually about the policy change. I think it's conversations like this that allow us to talk about the sustainability in construction that we need to start to have and to influence policy so that we make sustainable construction somewhat fashionable, if I should say, to put it in there and say every time we talk about construction, we need to ask the questions about how do we make it more sustainable. And I think I'll give an example that the UK has a Green Building Council that contractors and engineers and all these companies that are involved in construction sort of have to go to and get accredited as people that are into green building construction. And so that's like sustainable construction. And so if we could have, even if it doesn't start from the governments instituting it themselves, if let's say, for example, PowerAfrika says, you know what, if you guys want to do sustainable construction, we are the ones that give people badges to say, these people are green, these people are sustainable in their construction. And eventually word will go into the industry to say, you know what, And if the government then says, you know what, if you are not accredited by the Green Building Council, then we cannot be giving you tenders, or we cannot be tendering out any of this construction work to you. That's how we then get to influence policy and make it more sustainable. And so I think we need to build this institutional capacity and say, what are the standards for sustainable construction in our country? What are the standards for sustainable construction on the continent? And then the free trade will be easier, because if we have the same standards, or maybe more or less the same, if we can maintain a standard and say, we don't take anything lower than this, we don't take anything more substandard than this, then we can push sustainable construction on the continent and in the country further.
I love what you said about, making sustainability fashionable again. And, when I think about that, I think about, young professionals that are looking for housing, that the first thing they think about, or the questions they ask developers or the real estate agent, is how sustainable is this home? Because those are things also, as people that look for housing or live in houses, we don't really think about. And how do we start to incorporate that thought process? And I don't know about what you guys think, but perhaps maybe this is something that could be included in an educational curriculum to help people start thinking more sustainably, not just in housing, but sustainable as a whole. And with that being said, when we look at the future of sustainability in Africa, what exactly does that look like to you? Veronica?
I could.
Yes. Oh, yes, please.
All right. I think it goes back to my question that I posed earlier. What's the plan? Because there's a lot of talk on sustainability, but as a city, as a country, as an organization, even as just an individual, what's your plan when it comes to sustainability? What are we aiming for? What's the vision? Because a lot of it then gets wasted because we just talk about things and then there's no proper direction as to where we're going. And so I think as a continent, I think we can spearhead this as the youth, because we really are looking at how to make sure that we will have resources in the future. So if anyone should be responsible for safeguarding sustainability, it is the young people in all these countries, to say, what is the vision? By the time we get to 50, what are we going to be leaving for our children and their children's children? And so these conversations on sustainability have to be had on all levels, in all sectors, not only in construction, not only in housing, but we need to start having the dialogue, the conversations, and saying, this is what we have right now. What is the plan? What is your vision? How do we get to that? How do we influence policy? Because I think we really have a lot of influence, but because we're not having platforms like this one to actually talk about these things.
Yeah.
And sidebar, the lab is going to keep on giving you this platform, guys. But we need to start having these conversations more often. We're talking about inclusivity as part of the housing thing that we did as PowerAfrika Labs. It was through a conversation that we had with Leo and saying, you know what? I was in the UK at that time and I was saying, no, it looks like there are a lot of people living with disabilities this side. And then we realized that, no, it's not that. It's that they've got access to infrastructure. And now, a few months later, we're about to build a sustainable home that's inclusive. And so it starts with the conversation. Let's have the conversations on the continent as young people and make sure we safeguard our future and that of our children.
Thank you, Patience. Anyone else would like to add on to that?
Yes, let me come through. I think sustainability is very broad, because you can talk about sustainability from the whole context of economic, environmental, and social perspective, or from a people, planet, profit perspective. So it would be around how profitable is your house, or how environmentally friendly is your home, or how socially inclusive is your place. So the future of sustainability, I think I made some remarks around COVID and how people are living in informal settlements are being affected. So if we are going to be looking at post-green recovery in terms of post-COVID, we are saying, what is the sustainability aspect going to be looking like? So it means we are basically saying, how do we improve our homes from environmental degradation and inadequate services? Right now, we have a lot of water shortages. If you look at our wash, in our homes or in our areas where we are living, they've been depleted or degraded over time. If you're looking at household air pollution in our rural homes, I was actually looking at design on urbanizing rural homes, So those are the aspects that you want to look at when you talk of future sustainability. You also want to talk in terms of the actual cities and services provision, the proper lighting that you get, to function properly, which reduces exposure of your girl child and which facilitates for inclusion for both men and women in terms of designs. Also, you want to pick it up from a resilience perspective, especially if you look at your environmental side, where we are frequently getting these climate shocks over time, and we are constantly getting into this vicious cycles of disaster losses, and where our capacities to recover are probably on the decline, or there's an increased demand for, houses that are of good quality to ensure that our risks are reduced and the capacity to adapt is enhanced. So I think when you look at sustainability over time in terms of sustainable housing, you want to incorporate key elements of the quality of the house that you are having, from the actual materials of building, the type of designs that you have, the inclusiveness of the home that you are actually living in, and even the purchasing power of that household that you have. So to me, it's this whole cycle that is intertwined to bring the actual perfect definition of sustainability, from a social angle to an environmental angle to an economic angle. Then you can drive sustainability in your house or have a sustainable home. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. That was a very good point, looking at the fact that we need to think about the quality of our products, the quality of our housing, and how we kind of give that to our consumers. And learning from Fluxus and the model that you have, could you tell us a little bit more about, the fact that we're looking at the quality of speed, sustainability, all of that is already included in the model that Fluxus has already developed. So how do you guys ensure the quality of those buildings without giving that factory look and feel? I don't know if that's a concern that maybe some people might have when it comes to thinking about sustainable building in factories.
Yeah, when we discussed this, I think a previous speaker mentioned standardization is very important, not only from the policy scale, but also industry self-regulation is very important. So once we have the standard, it's easier to scale and adapt to local context, and also building trust, building capacity, human capacity throughout the value chain is a key factor to ensure quality. And Flux House is designed to be sustainable in its production, construction, and use. Like from a design perspective, we incorporate passive housing principles to reduce energy consumption, and with, I mentioned before, a minimal number of components, so streamline the whole process, simplify the whole process. I think that is the key when we adapt the componentized system in different parts of the world. And because this simplification of the design will serve to reduce the capital investment requirement for setting up the factory, facilitate automation to further extract the efficiency when we produce it and drive quantity. Because when you manufacture it in a controlled environment, you don't have to worry about weather conditions. You don't have to worry about a lot of things that you have to on site. So that will reduce a lot of time and also will provide a safe and controllable environment for a higher quality of supervising and producing the product. Another aspect is the digital technology. Using the most advanced digital technology throughout the design and construction process can enhance productivity and also collective intelligence. And this is without borders. We can use the digital platform. We can design or collaborate with talent, with the local residents and from another country with more expertise in a certain area. So in this digital platform model will enable a smarter planning and design within, for example, our companies and also amongst our collaborators, and safer environment for working workers, either construction contractors or people who build house, hire their network themselves. In our company, this method actually provide a much more predictable timeline for our clients. Our clients are developers in this case. So really in embracing digital technology can improve sustainability for everyone involved. I really like your last question about envisioning the future, because that's how we manifest. We paint a picture in 50 years when now the generation is young. At that time, they are the older generation leaders. So I think at that time, the world will be a different place when we all have a higher understanding of collaboration in a very truthful way, and African continent will have the talents to take the leadership role and set up the standard, like Patience said. That's very important. So it's providing that provide a fundamental platform for a more balanced way to provide solutions that can be adaptable for every place, but everybody have access to the knowledge and awareness of what is sustainability and what is the tools, what is the financial innovation tools available elsewhere, and we can apply.
Absolutely. We need to definitely keep on educating ourselves and educating others around that, and get to that point, like you said, manifesting our future. And that is currently happening now. We're the only ones that can do that. And just from, what you said about what Fluxus does, I was reminded of a conversation I had with Leo around an actual sustainable developer here in South Africa that's doing something quite similar, where they're building these communities of homes that are built in a factory, and then they're assembled on the site, and they're going away like hot potatoes. Some of them are not even yet finished, but have already been bought. So I'm seeing that there's a huge need, that people want more sustainable housing. People want to get to that point. But now, I think one of the big questions that I would like to find out is, how do we start, encouraging those that are living in already existing houses? This is just linked to something one of our viewers has said, and that is Siphelele, who said that he currently is sitting at a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how sustainable his house is, because it's quite old. And I'm sure there's many of us that are currently living in that situation. How do we start thinking about turning our already existing houses into something a little bit more sustainable, even from the little things like saving water or, saving electricity? How do we start incorporating that?
I think, the quick wins would be like what you say, starting small is like recycling of waste. You could have dedicated position in your house where you have different, for organic waste. And, this is part much lacking within the local context. It's like you could easily sort out your waste within your house, and then allow yourself to have that conscious practice of how your home could, have a grey water system, for example. These are easy installations that you could put getting attached to, your outdoor tanks from your grey water and probably water lawn. And I think in South Africa, there was an innovation like that, add-on. So much of these houses would have add-ons innovation, so an add-on innovation would include, that type of grey water system. And obviously, depending on the financial sustainability on the part. So when you take on renovations, one of the most important things that you would then look at would be, for example, smart lighting. If you're taking your home for the second part of renovation, if you want to do energy saving, you go for smart lighting. And if that's a bit financially hectic, you then go back and use energy savers instead of the 60-watt bulbs, 100-watt bulbs. But if you are going for renovations, like every house has got its own lifespan. And if you say this house is old, and I think for the second phase of renovation, you'll be looking at add-ons. What am I adding on to this house that could complement, because it's already a superstructure that existed. And you are not going to change the overall superstructure, but have add-ons that support that. So, adding on solar is not something that you need to change the entire house. Getting yourself off the grid and using, more cleaner, sustainable solar energy. Add-ons. So I would say add-ons would be more practical, and we are seeing this a lot in a lot of countries where, add-ons include things like solar geysers. They include like solar, completely, off-grid plant on the house, and generally also for people who do have space around their houses, a simple practice such as just establishing a green space around the house, allowing yourself to have a lot of green spaces. We cannot talk about the greater part of technology when we cannot use nature as the ultimate best technology that we have as a carbon capture system. So being very intentional about, having the simple add-ons. So you might not be ready for a second innovation, but having a home garden that is, having a tree, a traditional indigenous tree at your house that would take probably 10 years to grow, but at the same time, by the time it's a mature tree, it's cooling more than 100,000 cubic meters of air. And now you can have a place, where you can then say, oh, my area is cooler, because of all this densification, we're going to have the establishment of cities, we're going to need a lot of trees. And if we don't plant them now, we're going to have a lot of urban heat islands because of the way we have constructed our homes. So basically having add-ons that are more simpler, greener, and more practical. So it has to come from a space where you assess your current living condition, your current financial budget, and see, the second phase of my renovation, I'm going to be intentional about smart lighting in this house. I'm going to be intentional about energy saving in the house. So I'm going to have, and the good thing is sustainability is catching up. Other local banks here are offering, solar loans, because people ours is a very complicated scenario where load shedding kind of pushed people to be more greener. But, the lack of people having energy from the grid then push people to have greener energy. So I think because the instruments are becoming more and more available, and I predict that in the next 5 years locally, you would have more insurance companies insuring a lot of these renewables. So your renewable energy home will have insurance, and there will be more uptakers from the local environment. So add-ons would be more practical in terms of making your home more sustainable, starting with planting a tree in front of your house, basically.
As a plant mom myself, I approve this message. So we should definitely get more plants. Patience, you seem like you had something to add on to that.
Yes, I wanted to say, with all these add-ons that Leo was talking about, do it with someone, do it with a neighbor, do it with people along your street. Then now you sort out your waste, you manage your waste together. If there's anything that you can recycle and get something out of it, do it with someone. I think my advice would be that in a lot of add-ons that we can add to our own personal spaces, but tell someone about it, talk to someone about it, and do it as a street. I know there's a neighborhood in Chicago where they've got solar systems for themselves, but then with time they ended up having to sell their solar to other neighborhoods, and so Don't look at it as something that you are going to do by yourself. You can start by yourself, but talk to your neighbor about it. Maybe you can save more water if you use it together. Maybe the solar installation is going to be cheaper if you do it together. The waste management is going to be more lucrative if you've got more waste from 2 households, from 3 households. So do it with someone. That's my...
I also want to add because people have this demand, this intention to really improve sustainability, and there are new business model innovations that can help support that in a financial way. For example, with like Leo mentioned, the add-on to make the home smart, connected, and service providers or product providers can consider developing a pay-for-access market for high-priced, energy-consuming products and appliances, and this will like low-income communities, and especially in low-income families, they will, in the US at least, live in very poor energy efficiency conditions. And so business models where they can avoid initial very high cost investment for energy efficient upgrade through usage fees and spread the cost over time. And like Patient mentioned, the network really sharing the resources in a most efficient way and based on smart grids and different applications will encourage them to retire old, poor performing appliances in favor of the new ones in a financially sustainable way.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Fanny. And we are getting towards the end of our session today. I'd just like to ask all those that are still watching with us, could you please send any questions that you have to the panelists right in the comment section? Until then, I would like to just offer each of the panelists to share their final thoughts from the conversation today and any last key statement, reflection that you'd like to share with those that are watching. Veronica, I think your mic is unmuted.
Oh, yes. I was saying I'll go first. I think from my side, in terms of the takeaway remarks, it's basically on the role of DFIs in terms of supporting resilient infrastructure and construction, where we see that it will facilitate for a triple dividend in terms of reducing damages and losses in infrastructure, and also facilitating for improved lifestyles for communities, as well as increased attractiveness for improved living for people. So I think the DFIs can really play a critical role in also fostering affordable housing from promoting dialogues with government as well as with clients in terms of looking at the possible incentives and tax breaks that can be offered to the low-income households, as well as different policies that can stimulate green investment in order to avoid probably brown lock-ins when it comes to sustainable and resilient development. I think they can also support in terms of creating green and social bonds, where they look at a focus around impact investing, where you are not only looking at market-based profit, but you can also facilitate for a marginal profit, but that is also driven by social and environmental benefits. And you also want to build on the key elements around transaction costs. I think there are high transaction costs that are associated with housing. Some of the real or perceived risk and regulatory uncertainty, I think also which comes with the issue around land acquisition that was discussed earlier on. I think those are some of the critical enablers that DFI can come on board and facilitate for elimination or reduction of such risk and provide the necessary hedging for the people so that they can get affordable housing. So I think for a start, that should be the good to go. Of course, the design demonstration of bankability and market viability housing that also has low carbon technologies that further attract additional private investment into social and affordable housing for the communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Veronica. And who'd like to go next? Just summarizing final thoughts before we get to some of the questions from our viewers.
I can go next. Following with the discussion around social impact investments, this is getting sustainable construction sector is getting in the picture as a viable asset now. So maybe it's one of the things we are working at the World Home Foundation is setting up an international standard for affordable housing sector. Some country call it social housing sector, to have the ESG standard. So we can aggregate the capital from impact investors, and some of them are very large institutional investors now, to aggregate also demand from the developer side, whether they are large operators or smaller developers for affordable housing. So this is one thing we're working on. I think that in 5 to 10 years, ESG is going to be a standard for how we value public companies and private asset alike. And we want affordable housing to be on the map. My final thought is just look forward to the same direction, align our intentions. Once housing is on the agenda of all national and global priorities, we can incorporate multidisciplinary wisdom from technology, design, urban planning, financing, and public governance. We can then align our effort to achieve the goal in the most sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Fanny. And Patience.
Right. Thank you, Karen. I think I will just keep on saying the same thing. My final thoughts are, what is the plan? You know, as an individual, what's your plan? When it comes to housing, what's your plan? You know, we are all young people here, and what's your plan? What steps are you going to take to make sure that wherever it is that you end up calling home is going to be a sustainable home? In your community, what's your plan, you know, for making the quality of life more sustainable in your community? In the organization you're from, what's the plan, you know? And as we go to the larger prospect of construction, the whole industry, as we look at it as a continent, as a city, as a country, what is the plan? And I think once we start having these questions in our minds and having the conversations, then we can start coming up with solutions. And I think that's what we need the most at the moment, to come up with solutions that can make, like what we said earlier, sustainability fashionable. In as much as it sounds nice, it's actually something that is a matter of urgency for the world at large. So yeah, what's the plan?
What is the plan? Thank you for that, Patience. Something to ponder on as we get towards the end. And Leo, any last words and final thoughts?
I think my final thoughts came at the end with value and patience. The idea of having affordable housing as a viable asset, which is growing, and the bankability is increasing because of the demand. Like, as of last year, OMI, the Old Mutual Investment Group Africa, announced that it will be sourcing close to $500 million, 500 million in affordable housing projects. And this is from the market. So already you have a fund that's close to 500 million being raised in Africa for affordable housing. So that then clearly defines that affordable housing is definitely a viable asset. And the project I said earlier on, it's a local Old Mutual again, in the local country, Zimbabwe. invested close to $15 million. And then you have other building society as well, investing close to $20 million, $30 million worth of financing into affordable housing. So the appetite is growing. And if you see an appetite growing from institutional investors such as banks, then you definitely know that DFIs will follow suit. Pension funds, because they are more adjusted on, longer returns. So if mortgages are more at play within Africa and people creating affordable housing mortgages, you look at DFIs also have an appetite because they have a developmental appetite mandate. So sustainable housing for us, and I think we made this case when we made our first inclusive home here in Zimbabwe, which is currently being supported by the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe. People thought it was more charity-based because it's for persons with disabilities. But on the grander approach of it, it was actually trying to unlock more financing for people with disabilities, using DFIs as a tool to do that. And you find that people are actually willing to take mortgages for their house if they have disabilities. There are other people who already, because we did consultations, who already have existing houses that are not friendly for them, and they would want to swap for an inclusive home after having a guarantee. So a bank would easily give a loan to a person that has a $30,000 house to get a $50,000 house, because already the funding gap has been reduced by an existing asset that they already hold. So on the market, when people hear about persons with disability, they think charity. When they hear affordable housing, they think charity against sustainability. Because for me, I think sustainability speaks into financing. It's the whole value chain. The financing part has to be sustainable. Whoever is financing it has to see a return. And I remember I was looking at how to convince your CFO on sustainability, an article by Harvard Business Review. And they were saying that because they understand EBITDA, they understand earnings before tax, they are failing to understand returns on innovation, returns on marketing. But then now the knowledge is getting broader, where it's not just profit and loss statement. It's how do we recoup investment if we invest in an innovation. The downward investment reaping is going to be more, and we call it return on sustainable investment. And this is what we are actually trying to calculate from the current model that we're building. For every investor that has put in money, we're trying to calculate how much they are going to get from this house. And once we start coining such terms such as return on sustainable investment, people will create an appetite, because the most important thing that Fanny mentions, affordable housing is a viable asset. It's only going to happen if there's appetite from institutional investors. How do we create an appetite? We show them the returns, and these returns come in different forms, shapes, and sizes. So the key thing here would be, and I'm excited about this as I just close up, and one of the most important things that I'm very particular about as a lab and as an individual is that intentional conversations and sustainable collaborations. Our first discussion last year in August was on how to build the first inclusive home, and we had 99% of the people on this panel were involved. I remember Veronica was one of the judges, and all the other guys were the judges, and we collaborated, and now we have starting to build a superstructure just from conversations. And I think that's why Patience, as our Chief Sustainability Officer, was constantly hammering on what's the plan, because they are not just conversations, they are leading conversations into more robust collaboration. We have an intention of the conversation. Who do we want to be part of the conversation? And how do we unlock the ideas, the intentionality to then build? So for me, it's about the next thing will be advertising on this platform. Our next conversation is building a house that is prefabricated, 3D printing, whatever you call it, locally here in a country like Zimbabwe. So that would be my final remark.
Thank you for that, Leo. I like the fact that we're looking at it also from an economical perspective, the finances that go into sustainability and the returns from a sustainable home. If the panelists can please allow for more time, as we just have a few questions from the panelists. I know that we have run out of our time at the moment, just for 5 more minutes of your time, just to answer a